Sick.
Hello.
Yo.
Okay, the movie just ended, so just
Awesome.
let
Yeah.
the credits run, and then I'm gonna switch the stream over.
Cool. I was just following it.
The insane text chat.
I was checking in on it. I watched the movie like 2 nights ago.
Oh, nice.
For the first time in almost 10 years.
Here, give me just a minute.
Of course.
Man, if I didn't make that movie, that would still be one of my favorite movies.
Rodney, your name is Louisa on your screen.
We have a couple other people in the Zoom call. That's just the other people who are streaming it to the Discord.
Cool. Jonathan just texted me, so I assume he's.
Yeah, I think he was watching it in the Discord, so he should be in here any minute.
Hey, Lucas.
Hello. The credits are just finishing. Okay, I'm about to switch over. Okay, hopefully everyone in the Discord can see and hear everything. If we could get a confirmation in the chat that is the case. Okay. All right, so I think we're just waiting on Jonathan to show up.
I'll text him again, see where he is. He's the one who told me the movie was almost over. So I thought he was here.
Make sure he didn't message me.
Well, before we start, I mean, thanks for doing all this. Thanks for setting this up.
Yeah, thanks for coming and being a part of it.
Oh, Jonathan says he still hasn't gotten the link.
Oh, let me
I think I can text it to him. Is that gonna work?
Yeah, that should work. Let me send it to him again.
Well, it might be annoying to have the link on his phone instead of his laptop because he's probably not going to be zooming from his phone.
Oh yeah, I've just been communicating with him through Instagram, so I don't know if he's. Let's see.
Oh, here it is.
You sent it to me so long ago.
Sorry, I know there's been a lot of messages since then.
Yeah, you and I have been chatting since then, and it was buried way in there. Didn't occur to me that I might have ever gotten it before.
Okay, so I guess I just wanted to start out with just like, impressions. It sounded like the three of you haven't really watched this that much since it has come out, or at least not in quite a while. And so I wanted to get your first impressions after, 10 years.
Yeah, I haven't seen this movie, I don't know, maybe in 5 or 6 years, and I had forgotten half of it. I love this movie. And I didn't make it, but this would still be one of my favorites. I mean, obviously, it's got an amazing soundtrack, which is why I think we're here, which, is certainly half the movie. But, I had forgotten, how precise some of those observations were. They really kind of blew me away. In particular, I think I'd forgotten that Nicholson's hairline turned into a Hitler mustache. Yeah. And I was like, what are you with that, man? 100%. That's right on the money. Or the lips and the TV, that still gives me the willies.
Yeah, I was surprised how much of it I remembered, actually, but there were bits that I had forgotten that have just sort of entered into my like vernacular while like thinking about things too. Like I forget who even says it, talking about the opening shot feeling like it puts the audience in the perspective of this monster, of this unknown point of view, right? And that's why the film is scary. And I think about like, and maybe that wasn't a new idea for me at the time when seeing that movie, but I think about that idea all the time of like framing an audience perspective from an unknown point of view, and that's a really interesting thing to do.
Are you
and that's
talking
why that
specifically
film is...
about that helicopter shot?
Yeah. And that's
that was Bill Blakemore's observation, and it's funny because I think, like, I first saw the movie when it came out when I was, I don't know, 11 or 12, and I only made it about 20 minutes in, and that whole moment, the way he described it was exactly, I wasn't nearly as articulate, as a 11-year-old versus a globe-trotting, ABC News correspondent who's flown with the Pope. But the way he talked about it felt like a God's eye point of view, or even sort of angels, demons, fate observing the people, and that what was going to happen to them might have sort of greater metaphysical implications. I think instinctually I felt something like that, and I think it's that music, and especially those vocalizations, had that effect on me, that it's not just a suspense story about, three people in a hotel. It is a religious event, that's going to transpire.
Yeah. I think my impressions, having not seen this in a really long time, is there was a certain charm at the
Crackpot theories have taken another turn.
That's what I was gonna say. It's like there was a certain, like, back then it was like, oh, this Dan Brown just batshit, like, this is cute, it's harmless, it's cute. And in the wake of like QAnon, I'm like, well, this is a very similar impulse that has taken a very dark turn in the world, and not with no accusations of the 5 individuals in this film, but that type of sort of unmoored from any type of like education or discipline or history or like peer group.
That's not fair to say of all 5 of them, I don't think.
Okay, but so yeah. two especially. I think Bill Blakemore is fairly reasonable, and obviously, yeah.
I can't escape that either, and a lot of it is that the movie's largely described as a conspiracy theory movie, which it is and it isn't. And the moon landing stuff in particular, it's 7 minutes of a film that's an hour 40. But yeah, I remember in the aftermath of it seeing this kind of you know, I don't know, let's just say reading happening to like music videos and Super Bowl performances. Like I'd say midway between 237 and QAnon, we had those sort of, we had those YouTube videos and those blog postings where people were seeing Beyonce videos and Lady Gaga's live performances as sort of Illuminati rituals, which is clearly on the road to QAnon.
Well, and I mean, I tie a lot of it. I tie a lot of it too to this sort of like very like human need to like desperately think that there's like a logic or a reason or that someone's in charge, right? It's like even if you don't agree with them, it's like at least knowing that the reptoids have this all planned is just like, oh, okay, at least like someone knows what's happening right now. It's very similar to like to a religious impulse to me to just want to know that there's a plan. And I get it. I mean, it's chaotic and terrifying unless there's a plan. And even if the plan is something nefarious that you don't agree with, I don't know.
Yeah, I remember at the time, obviously, because this came out, and I was in graduate school. I was teaching like film history and like film theory at UCLA, and I was just like, oh my god, this movie is so amazing, and these people have done so much work, and they're actually, they're so astute, and it's all, I would give them all an F in my class. Like there is no like, this is not how scholarship works. But if you don't like if you're completely on your own in this bubble of like shining blogs, it's like you guys are fucking brilliant.
Well, I mean, I think it's, I mean, watching it again this time after so long, it's striking for me, how close we are, between poles of genius and madness, and that I'm nodding along, and then our paths diverge.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I just finished reading a book called The Strange Death of Alex Raymond, which is simultaneously, the most a graphic novel that is, equally possessed of genius and madness, where one of the most, gifted, talented, sort of draftsmen in comics he's trying to solve the mystery of the death of a sort of golden age of newspaper cartoonist in car wreck. And as he's meditating on it, he teaches himself to draw in the style of each of these sort of, of a half dozen or so superstars of newspaper cartooning. And in doing so, he tries to infer their different rivalries, but then it starts to get into this, kind of, very strange, he calls it comic book metaphysics, as he's getting into the symbolic weight of different characters and how some of their drawings and storylines would either predict reality or affect reality. And it gets out, and it goes down into many fascinating rabbit holes, and it's simultaneously, again, the deepest critique and study of some of that mid-century newspaper cartooning that you're ever going to find by somebody who knows that work, not just as a scholar of reading the stories, but has reverse engineered their drawing techniques. Like there's a big aspect of David Hockney's, was it Secret Knowledge? Was that his book?
Secret Knowledge, yeah. A Secret Knowledge of the Great Masters or something like that.
Oh, yeah, where he came
about optics.
Yeah, that classic painters were using this sort of lens device in order to capture photographic perspective, and he built one and created paintings using that style. And as a painter himself, he had an eye into how the stuff worked that no one else did. So this cartoonist is using similar techniques to learn to reverse engineer the drawing styles, but also because he's sort of an autodidact who's working alone and has been ostracized from the community for previous works that kind of went off into the interlands, goes off on these tangents that are almost incomprehensible.
I mean, and I love how when that happens in room 237, I'd forgotten how many times this happens where it just feels like you just handed them the rope and they just started tying it themselves and you just let them keep going and going and going. Like the scene where what's his name? Says that the guy with the guy who we met in Estes Park, who thinks that there's an airbrushed
Jay Widener,
who thinks there's an airbrushed Stanley Kubrick in the clouds, and you show every frame of that shot just one by one. And as an audience member, you're like, he's gonna, oh, it's.
Yeah.
Although that scene is kind of frustrating because there are times where I think I kind of see it, that it's not completely definitive, that there's nothing there, but it's also just an amazing metaphor of, seeing images in the crowd, as the idea of random of people seeing imagery within random data. And I know, like Jay, he gets, he goes further on limbs than anybody else, especially with the moon landing stuff. But by the same token, I think it's probably not a huge leap to say that if The Shining is in some ways, investigating, investigating America at the end of the 70s, that some sort of references to the moon landing might be appropriate to that.
Of course.
And some of his observations, and there were things he said, that didn't make it into the film, where, he was able to decipher, book titles and magazine titles in their Denver apartment, including, I think there was one as Sickness as a Metaphor. Is it the Sontag book? Illness as a Metaphor, that is very striking, coming right off of the scene where, the pediatrician has come to visit Danny. He's the one who talked about how Danny rotated 180 degrees on that hexagon carpet, which I never would have noticed. And we can certainly disagree about what the implication of that is, but Jay made some unbelievably specific, signs and notations.
Yeah.
While watching it.
Well, what I was going to say was, have you seen, because when I asked Jay, I was like, hey man, where is the face in the clouds? And he was like, you have to buy my DVD. I draw over it so you can see exactly where it is in my DVD. And I think we went to his webpage and I was like, $70.
We did watch that other movie he made, that fiction film he made though.
We did watch his narrative fiction film about the people that live inside of Mount Hood.
The Lemurians.
The Lemurians, right?
No, it's Shasta, right? Isn't it Shasta?
Oh, is it Shasta? Yeah, okay.
It's in California, yeah.
But I was really struck by, a lot of Blakemore stuff, and in a way, I was like, wow, he's kind of predicting CRT here, and sort of the blowback and sort of the controversy of looking back and acknowledging history and the sins of history, and how to sort of mentally process that, and the way that dovetailed with John Fell Ryan's forward and backwards thing, I thought was, in some ways, kind of moving.
What I love, I remember talking to at your house after the film had come out, when we met John Fell Ryan at like a birthday party or something at your house, Rodney. And I talked to him where he was like, oh, I've come to the conclusion that Danny is killing his father for hurting him before they ever went to the Overlook Hotel. That his father hurt him, dislocated his shoulder, and then they go to the Overlook, and Danny figures out that this whole place is full of ghosts, and he can manipulate the ghosts into driving his dad crazy, into killing his dad, and that the whole movie is Danny is killing Jack. It's all Danny controlling everything so that Jack dies, and he and his mom get to live without it, which is fucking amazing.
That's a great.
I love that.
I love that. Yeah.
Danny is the one who lets him out of the meat locker just for that purpose.
Right.
Yep.
I love that idea, and and JFR is also. He's not the only person who's picked up on that Playboy thing, but the first time that I was able to see that they were right, the Playgirl thing, whether that was a practical joke that Jack Nicholson played on the set or how that happened, it is a totally bizarre detail in that movie that I had, that hardly anybody had noticed before.
It's funny having it's funny just thinking about all the things that the three of us have made since we made that movie too, like both thinking about, Rodney, your later films, which we've worked on, how this sort of fits into that sort of trajectory, because having not seen it for so long, I've become now so used to you being a character in your own movies that I'd sort of forgotten how like sort of formalistic and like anonymous this movie felt. And the only time I think that we hear your voice is you saying, but why did he make the movie so complicated right at the end, which I think is so funny now.
We do see the back of your head once, though.
Yes, that's true, right?
People have falsely reported that they remember seeing an archive shot in the movie of Kubrick facing of Kubrick stacking the Calumet cans. They've been in touch with a false memory of that in hindsight. But I mean, it couldn't more clearly be an abstracted, reenactment, whoever it was who was holding the can.
Whoever it was.
Yeah.
I realize we're not answering. You asked one general question, and we went 36 minutes just chatting with each other.
No, it's fine.
That's going to continue to happen until somebody stops
that's
this.
Great. That's why everyone is here. So actually, no, I have one that this is kind of leading into. Rodney, I don't know if this has ever become an issue in like any of the productions that you've done, but do you have any sort of kind of like ethical guidelines that you have where like if one of your subjects starts spouting something where you're like, maybe this is not a good opinion to be, projecting, in this wide release, would you cut it out? I don't know if that's something that you've ever encountered and, had to consider, but.
Well, I mean, I don't know that I necessarily have a manifesto, but I do try. I do consider that the ethics of nonfiction filmmaking pretty seriously in making any of these things. And often, like one thing I do in this film, plenty of times is if somebody says something, I don't know, that's fairly provocative and way over the top. If they qualify it, I always make sure they leave the qualifier in and not to play maybe the more interesting, provocative one of just cutting to the most outrageous thing said. If there's ever any qualifier, any uncertainty about it, I always try to be as true to that as I can. I know in this one, like there's a point near the end, right, where which in some ways, kind of counteracts cuts. I'm not sure the phrase I'm looking for, but towards the end, Jeffrey says, whether these things were put in there on purpose or not, we all know about postmodern, film reading and the death of the author, that I left, I found it interesting, and my prejudice is to leave, the most interesting things in the movie. But, without that, it would have been a much more, that softens the entire film, right? That introducing the idea that it doesn't matter whether Stanley Kubrick meant these things, exactly or not, or at least it doesn't matter to Jeff. So
it matters to Jay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and that's fascinating, right? I mean, for me, one of the ways I tried to think about this movie is not that it is the decoder key to unpacking the symbolism of The Shining, but it is a look at The Shining through the eyes of 5 people who have become, kind of obsessed and have spent years, looking at it a frame at a time, forwards and backwards, and from every which angle. And I liked it the most when they disagreed, right? Like, I think this is probably to one way to compare it to conspiracy theory movies is that there's a shit ton of ambiguity and uncertainty in this. Not the least of which is because many of these people, disagree with each other. Or, we'll go into a scene, we'll go into Ullman's office, and Julia is, what's important in this scene is the window. And, Jay is, no, let's take a look at the paper tray. Or the American flag. And, who knows what Kubrick really meant, but it probably wasn't both of those things. It was probably one or the other. Same thing when we go into, the pantry of, there's the Calumet can. There's also, I don't know if this actually got called out in the movie, but I think John Paul Ryan talked about the Golden Ray. There was another box, REY, like Golden King, which is sort of a Aztec reference, which tied into the way he compared that big central staircase to the, to the staircase on the
pyramid,
on the Mayan pyramids. I don't know if that completely answers your ethics question, but I try to represent each character's worldview as best I can.
Sure.
Right, and I sweat about that.
Did you ever get any blowback from any of the other subjects who felt like their position was being mocked by being included with some of the other subjects?
I didn't, but a couple of the people who declined who didn't want to appear in it were folks who were certain enough about their point of view that they didn't want to see it weakened by being juxtaposed with other readings.
Right. That's the mastermind, right. He asked you who else you were talking to, and once you told him, he said he wouldn't do it.
I think it's more. I think they're more back and forth than that, but ultimately, it was something along those lines. And the same thing with Rob Ager, right, who has that amazing site where page upon page upon page of Shining analysis, but other Kubrick films as well. He's the one who saw the body in the blood of the elevator. He saw the death of Tony in the way that there's this, in the way that, like, if you look at the way the blood comes out, that it looks like there's sort of like a corpse kind of being washed over with a liquid, with a fluid. And then there's another guy who, like, if that would have happened, then there's another guy, a CGI artist, who didn't believe that. So he recreated the still in 3D. And somehow he was able to digitally reproduce the whole lighting environment. And in doing that, he realized that that thing that looked like a body, that it was a reflection of some particular part of the room. But
wow.
And I just love that more than for the conclusion, but the fact that it was so important to him to discover where that anomaly came from, that he would recreate the fluid pour, in 3D with, accurate physics and lighting.
Yeah, one of the interesting things I think about the movie is, not just the lengths that the people will go for these theorizations and stuff, but also the technical lengths, of all the mapping outs of the set. And as you said, someone like completely recreating the lighting is like, the amount of time and effort it takes to do that is impressive.
It is. So, I've seen people sort of take a jab at these guys, by, saying they've got too much time on their hands. But I think a pretty safe, retort to that, is, think about how much time other people spend memorizing sports statistics.
Fair enough.
Or anything really.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do lots of useless things for hours.
So many.
Just nothing to do with anything.
Memorizing one of the most profound, pieces of art of the 20th century isn't that much of a waste of time.
No, yeah.
So I think I was interested in kind of how this whole collaboration came about. I mean, most of the people here know Bill and John as part of Clipping, but, when this movie premiered, that was before that, Death Bomb 118 face tape even came out. And so...
I guess it was.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah,
because
I would have been like...
Well,
the 10-year anniversary of that is like next fall, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, I was
I
actually
know.
just checking Discogs, and that said September 2012. So I don't know how accurate that is.
Well, so a mutual friend of mine and Rodney's, I didn't know Rodney, a guy named Kevin Lee, who used to be in a band called Sexu Roba that played around LA, and I was friends with, and he's great. He works at Nickelodeon still, maybe. I don't know. He works in
Yeah,
animation now.
you can if you can see him teaching how theremins work in an episode of Yo Gabba Gabba.
And he plays and he plays theremin on our album Splendor and Misery also.
Yeah.
Rodney had asked him, you'd asked him to score Room
Yeah,
237.
I knew Kevin and I knew his band, and I was looking for, among other things, a synth-driven sound. So I reached out to Kevin, who deferred but recommended you and Bill, mostly from Nilbog, based on your work with Nilbog.
Yeah, so I was in a horror movie music cover band called Nilbog, which is goblin spelled backwards. We started as a goblin cover band entirely, and then added other stuff into it. So Rodney reached out, and I was in the middle of like a bunch of other projects. I was like scoring some absolutely atrocious made for TV movie that was a lot of work, and it was like, oh, a friend of a friend is making a documentary entirely out of found footage that at the time we thought would just come out on YouTube, and needs a feature-length score, and his budget is $0. And I was like, well, this seems like an obvious thing to pass on, but maybe I should watch 5 minutes of it. And I watched like 30 seconds of it, and I was like, well, if I don't do this, I'm an idiot. But I clearly need help. So and Bill and I had done some stuff at the time. I mean, we had started clipping. We had barely started clipping. I think we had like 3 or 4 songs, because I very much remember, Rodney, the first time we met at a bar downtown, and I was like, now I know you don't have any money, but we'd watched some of your music videos, and so I was like, so maybe you want to make a music video for this new band I'm starting, and I gave you a CDR of like 3 clipping songs, and then it took us 5 years to make that happen. But
that was supposed to be our payment for recording the film. Of course, it was going to be a trade. You were going to make us a music video, and we were going to do the movie. And what I remember was, like, Jonathan, you had to go on tour. It was like the final tour for your previous band. It was like right in the production of this. So you were like, okay, when you left, you'd left me with like, here are the main themes, like in MIDI files, and you were just like, make something for 3 weeks while I'm gone. And
I just because also the film wasn't entirely locked, as I recall, and I'd never worked on a documentary before, really, and I'd never worked on a film that wasn't locked either. And so I was like, there's no time, there's no money. I'm just gonna, like, every night for like a couple hours at the end of the night, I'm gonna make a new thing for this movie, and whatever it is in a couple hours, it's done. And that was like sort of the core of the main themes of it. I gave those things to Bill. I went on tour. I was in Poland in someone's living room, I think on Thanksgiving, and you called me and said, hey, we got into Sundance. And I thought, oh, I should probably take this one a little more seriously. And I came back, and
I think that's when we were like, we better get like a studio and like actually record Nick and David.
Nick and David, who were in Nilbog with me. Nick plays drums and David played guitar, and David, who has been on this show before, because he and I did the score for Murder Very Win. Yeah,
on another episode of this television show we are on.
Yeah. And then all of those people also played on the score for El Duce tapes, which Rodney made as well.
Well, and I remember, I've always, in all the temp versions of this movie, and I would make it sort of a scene at a time, I would always use temp tracks from my CD collection, which would be, sort of obvious go-tos like Tangerine Dream or Goblin or, things like that. And I remember every time that, Jonathan and Bill would give me a new track, whether it was a temp or a finished one, I would trash the temp and never miss it, and never be interested in hearing it, and never be interested in hearing it again, because it's a funny thing, the way music works, with film, but and I think this is actually even more the case for the Nightmare, that there are really sometimes subtle emotional changes that are even hard to sort of, describe in words. And I don't have any kind of a music education, so I can't speak, I can't talk about music, with any kind of technical ability. But we would try to describe, sort of emotional changes that would happen through. I mean, as far as the instrumentation and the general vibe, I think we're all on the same page very quickly. But I remember we sat down in the room that Jonathan, in the window that Jonathan's sitting in right now, and we watched the movie and we recorded, our conversation about how the music was going to flow as it went through. And there's one moment in particular that for some reason that really kind of sticks in my memory, and it's the Bill Blakemore scene, and I saw it, and I kind of remembered the conversation as we were watching the film tonight. But there's a moment where I think Bill is talking about, sort of the burden of history and how people can be overwhelmed by the horrors they encounter. But then, sort of the insight of the past isn't real. It's not a place that you can go to. And by being able to look at it that way, you can deal with the sort of horrors that you come across in history. But to me, it felt like up to this moment, he's sort of drowning. But when he gets this idea, it's like someone has thrown him a lifesaver, a float. And there's really kind of a particular moment where it turns, and then, the track comes from these guys, and it threads the needle, and it gets that emotional change. And, I think that, to me, it's voodoo how that works. But it's voodoo and it's magic, and it's one of the reasons, that this movie works as well as it does, because the music is so sensitive to the state of the characters.
Well, it is magic, and it's also like, it's so subjective the way that music can do that. And so, I mean, we're incredibly lucky that our tastes are aligned as they are too, because there are, plenty of projects where threading that needle is like really, really hard, that's like a really tough thing to do. And so the fact that on all of our projects, Rodney, I feel like the music just kind of like we start from a place of sort of an agreement of taste, and so the tweaks and the like developments are really fun, because we have such a shared language, I think, about it.
Yeah, so speaking of that, of further collaborations or the other projects that you've done, I don't know, I know that in that kind of small behind the scenes video about you guys making the music for this, you talk about how you didn't want to, just kind of recreate the stuff from The Shining. But, I mean, of course, there had to have been some cognitive thought about, that original, the fantastic Wendy Carlos score. And so I'm just kind of wondering about what that process is like for you guys, creating from, like with some inspiration in mind versus creating something just kind of completely from scratch. And I guess, in the filmmaking sense, creating something that's based around this existing property, rather than a subject that's like, you're coming up with and you have to make all this footage yourself, instead of having something to base it on.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's such an impossible task, right? To do, to have the Shining score as a thing that you then need to respond to, right? Because it's so brilliant, it's so good. And so, I mean, I think the nice thing was that there wasn't time or money to overthink these decisions, right? Mm-hmm. We kind of like, it's a lot of I wouldn't say first drafts, but first ideas, right, in the score, which is in some cases, a little frustrating. That'd be like fun to go back. Like I sort of hear things in it now and I think, oh, that's not very good, is it? But there are other things that are like, wow, I would never make that decision if I hadn't just made it in a split second and then had to move on. Right? There's so many sounds in there that like I sort of look back on, I'm like, I should remember that stuff works, that like it's not a thing that we think of usually.
I was remembering that there was like a whole queue of with over like 2001 footage that is us like straight up improvising. Like you're playing David CS50.
Yeah.
And I'm just turning knobs, and it just
We never do
in
that.
the movie. It just went right in.
Yeah, just like straight in there.
Is that the scene, the chapter that's called Room 237, where we have like the space capsule from the hotel room from 2001 to the Overlook Hotel? And that's the sound. It's like very oscillating.
Yes,
kind of.
yes.
Yeah, that's also one of my favorite tracks, especially like in a theater we can really hear it big. But for me, it just feels like neurons frying. Which is, sort of the experience, like that's sort of the scene where the characters are being overwhelmed, right? And as an audience member, if you're watching the Stargate, on LSD in 1968, that your brains are leaking out of your ears at the same time, and it seems to really provoke that in a nice way.
Yeah, I mean, and one of the things I remember, we talked about this, a handful of things. We talked about this when we went to the actual Stanley Hotel in Estes Park, Colorado, where Stephen King came up with where he based the actual novel, The Shining, to do, because they were doing a horror film festival. It was like 2013, I guess, probably like spring 2013, and it was the Stanley Fest, and it was a horror movie festival. And Jonathan and I were on a panel of like writing music for horror movies with like Nathan Barr, like who did like the Eli Roth horror movies, and I mean a ton of other stuff. He was there talking about like the score for Hostel.
Yeah, I feel like he had just done like the first season of True Blood or something, and now he's like the biggest deal imaginable. Like he's yeah.
And we were on this panel. I remember like us being like, well, we didn't have any obligation to be scary. Like we didn't actually have to scare anyone with our horror movie score. Like, and when someone, I think we were talking about like, well, we didn't even have to really feel burdened by like the Penderecki and the Carlos and the Ligeti and all the stuff that's in The Shining, because Rodney just sent us all this temp of Goblin, and we were like, yeah, we can do that.
I like the idea of that kind of music sort of evoking the time period of the movie, late 70s, early 80s, but sort of the, lower, the lower budget, less prestigious horror films of the same time, and finding, sort of the beauty and magic in those films. Because clearly, as much as 237 is about The Shining, it's a wildly humbler,
it's a very different thing. It would, it's very different that you're not trying to recreate the feeling of The Shining. It's about The Shining, but it is this scrappy, much humbler project. And I think that was sort of what we intuitively got from that's intuitive. When we seeing the movie, we're like, this is what he's asking for. He's not asking for us to write like Penderecki.
Well, and I mean, there's something like very like practical in documentary music too, of like sometimes you just need a ticking clock. Like you just need to move, like keep the pulse of things going along. If it's somebody talking for a really long time, it almost doesn't matter what they're talking about. You just like, if like all the Penderecki and some of the Carlos music and stuff in The Shining has this really incredible dense stasis to it that feels like time is frozen. And that's kind of death in a documentary sometimes. I mean, like we also do that sometimes, but you need something that sort of drives forward and keeps people feeling like they're moving down a road and they're going towards something. I always think it may have been like your movies, any other movie, there's so many cues, especially in documentaries. They're like, oh, this is just keep time, just let people know that we're on a path, we're getting somewhere, we're doing something, we're intentional. And that all that like Goblin, Tangerine Dream, John Carpenter, like kind of stuff has that feeling. Like, I mean, that's Carpenter's so good at that in his movies. And so it felt like to sort of as like also, you know, 237 and the theories in it was sort of like a pop culture, like a reaction to this piece of high art. So it felt appropriate for the music to be this kind of like pop culture reflection of that at the time too. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's that one moment where, you know, we're actually talking about the Wendy Carlos score, and we licensed a track from her. And it was interesting because it was sort of an alternate version of the Dies Irae theme that kind of continued past where it does in the, you know, in the real Shining.
Yeah.
And to hear, you know, kind of Bill trying to evoke it, and then, you know, the genuine sound comes. You know, and during that part, we're not seeing that much of the movie, right? We're seeing, you know, Murnau's Faust and, you know, other films that help, you know, talk about, you know, sort of the ideas that he associates that score with.
I always wonder like what the Wendy Carlos Kubrick like process was like, because so many of his movies were fully scored, and he just would throw out a score and replace it with sort of temp classical music. I mean, that happened with 2001, of course, with Alex North's score, and it happened with The Shining as well, right? There's a couple of pieces of Wendy Carlos music in that movie, and they're incredible, but there's all this other music that you can hear a lot of it now, and it's incredible music, but it's very like busy and active in a way that movie is not. And I always wonder how frustrating that was for her, and like also what the movie felt like in the stages sort of leading up to the final score. I'd be really curious to hear that movie with some of those original cues.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, I mean, there's more, you know, on that record of hers, there's more unused Shining cues. So I get the sense, you know, and this is, you know, not terribly informed by research or maybe vague memories of something I read 10 years ago, but, you know, that she would send him a bunch of music and he would drop it in, you know, where it would work. But, you know, I mean, he really preferred, like a lot of contemporary directors, you know, his record collection to working with a composer sometimes.
Yeah.
So that story, and John Ronson has that great documentary, Kubrick's Boxes, where they talk a little bit about, a lot about the making of Full Metal Jacket, and he talks a lot about navigating Kubrick's archive. And even when we saw the Kubrick show, you know, at LACMA, the one thing I wanted to see that I've never seen an image of is his record collection.
Mm.
How big it was and how he had it organized.
Yeah, totally.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that would be really fascinating.
One thing I wanted to ask about, you know, I think I've seen a lot of response to this movie that is like almost angry, like people are mad at this movie. You know, just kind of in the general talking about it, but also just, you know, tonight in the chat, I even saw that. Yeah. And it kind of makes me wonder about what people consider the role of a documentary being, and like what they're expecting it to be when they go into it. Because I think a lot of people see it as, you know, they're going to be taught something, or they're going to learn something that is, you know, objective. And I know you call a lot of your films, you know, subjective documentaries. So I'm curious to hear your take on, you know, what the role of documentaries or your films are.
Yeah, I think I'm probably more comfortable talking about my films, but, you know, one thing that one thing that is, you know, bugged me in other films are when talking heads are introduced and we're supposed to take everything they say at face value. You know, as they're the voice of objective reason. When what I find much more what I found much more interesting about this project was, in some ways, it started as like a science experiment, right? Me and my friend Tim Kirk, who produced the movie, were reading a lot of. We went down a big rabbit hole. And we were reading on as much, you know, sort of deep interpretation of, you know, what's going on in The Shining as we could. You know, one of the first ones we read was Jay Widener's, but, you know, there are a ton of others, and it seemed like an interesting science experiment to take conflicting interpretations and bump them up against each other and see if one would win if just their very existence would make them all suspect, or if they might sort of resolve into a grand unified theory. And, if you look at, I was really lucky in this movie that I got to be very involved in the marketing of it as well, right? So, like, none of the trailers or none of the taglines ever present this movie as the definitive skeleton key of reliably interpreting The Shining. That's not what this movie is. And it's never what I've told anybody this movie is, but it's, based on some of those negative reactions that you talk about, I think it is a movie that's it's the movie that some people are looking for, and it might be that all of these people are right, or one of them is right, or each of them are sometimes right. That is not important for this film to work the way that we all were hoping for it to work, which was to see The Shining through the eyes of radically different people. Because one thing that we do again and again is replay the same scene with somebody else talking about it, and all of a sudden the scene's transformed, right? And these things, and there's a lot of, and even things like Jack Nicholson appears on screen. Sometimes his face represents Jack Nicholson. Other times it represents Jack Torrance. Other times it represents Stanley Kubrick. Other times it represents a skeptical member of the audience. That, documentary is what this movie gets classified as, because, there's not 100 million different genres of film, but, it has probably more to do with experimental film than it does with journalism, right? And, the notion of Jack Torrance and Jack Nicholson in different shots representing different people, is, back in film school, I learned about the Kuleshov effect, where, audience expectation really influences what they see, and how a blank expression can be laden with emotion based on what it's intercut with. And the idea of seeing how far we could push that was something that was, fascinating to me from the get-go. I mean, I think it's probably, if you're going to, if you're going to classify it, it's closer to a video essay than it is to documentary. So, I mean, video essay is arguably, a branch of documentary. But I thought what I was doing slightly differently in this one than from something like Los Angeles Plays itself is that it's multiple narrators who don't necessarily agree with each other.
I found that's so funny too, that like so many of the like angry reactions to the film are like this movie wasn't what I wanted it to be. It was instead about a bunch of people interpreting a movie, making it about what they wanted it to be. Right? And it's like this weird sort of snake eating its own tail angry reaction to the movie that I've seen that I really love, actually, that I think is very funny.
Well, and yeah, every time I've seen, I wasn't really following the chat. I have no idea what people were angry about today, but what I remember people being annoyed at the film, which see, like it's very clearly a film about a certain tendency to get trapped in this movie and a certain type of personality that does so. It is not advocating any of these positions. And it's just like, you can be mad and you can disagree with someone's analysis. You can disagree with a number of the people in the film, or everyone in the film's analysis of the film. That is not what this movie is about. The movie is about this tendency for a certain personality. Like, it's about bringing out this propensity to get trapped in this movie, right? Or any movie. I mean, like, obviously this is it, but it could be a number of different things. But it's about this sort of this type of thinking. It's about it's a way of showing examples of a certain type of thinking. The film is not arguing for any one of these positions at all, which, it's either frustrating because you think it is and you're mad at it because you think that position is wrong, or you're mad because you think it should. You think you'd rather watch one of these people make one essay film about what is absolutely definitively true about The Shining, instead of this sort of much more zoomed out question of like a type of person, you know.
It's that same. I related to that same human need to just wanting a plan, wanting answers, right? Wanting a truth, you know.
Well, people are stopping out of my movies largely because they never have answers, only questions. You know, but this one is for me, it's the most safely inoculated from criticism, because if different people argue about The Shining, or you know, even to the extent of thinking whether it's genius or whether it's, you know, or whether it's his worst movie, when people argue about this movie, you know, it's history repeating itself as farce. You know, I can only kind of, you know, get a kick out of that. Some of the other movies are a little more personal, so criticism can sting a little.
Well, I wanted to bring up, because I had already mentioned that that film festival we all went to, one of the most amazing like talkback Q&A anything I've ever witnessed was a panel conversation. It was a panel discussion. It was Rodney, it was Jay Widener, who is the one who believes Kubrick faked the moon landing. It was Mick Garris, who directed the Steven Weber Shining for TV that Lucas you cut up in the
best way
show, which I hadn't seen that. I haven't seen that since it aired on TV in the 90s. And whoo, anyway.
I didn't see a cut of it, but
anyway, well, not to like shit talk another, because Mick Garris was also unbelievably nice,
the nicest human being,
just a super nice guy. I remember he thought I was fucking with him, and I wasn't even messing around, but like when I met him I was like, oh man, dude, Critters 2 meant a lot to me as a little kid. And he was like, are you serious? Are you making fun of me? And I was like, no. I really used to like Critters 2. But then it was him, and then Leon Vitali, who was one of Stanley Kubrick's best friends, who was the assistant director of The Shining and who was there for every shot. You know, he's you can see him in some of the making of footage. He plays he played Lord Bullington in Barry Lyndon. And he's the Red Mask in Eyes Wide Shut. That's right. And so the four of them are on stage, and it's the funniest thing because it's Leon Vitali arguing for why Kubrick's vision of The Shining is the ultimate one, with Mick Garris quietly arguing on behalf of Stephen King, saying, well, Stephen thought it was really bad and he liked mine better. And in the middle of that, Rodney is trying to sort of like talk about this and these ideas, and then there's Jay Widener just going, and the moon landing.
That talkback is a special feature on the DVD. When I watched it tonight, I put on the Blu-ray and synced it up with your stream, so that I could watch it on the TV and stuff. And I noticed all the special features on there that I have not revisited either.
That is on there. I want to see that again. That was amazing.
Yeah. No, there was a great moment where, you know, Jay was talking about the moon landing, and Leon wasn't having any of it, but advantaged Jay because he said, "Look, with all due respect, you weren't there in those days. You didn't come aboard until after Clockwork Orange." Oh,
it's true. That's true.
Jay does his homework.
We also had that great. We had also a particularly good drunken post-show talk back where we had all had a few, and it was a late night screening, and Leon Vitali and I were fighting about the fonts used in the credits.
It was like, that was an amazing. That's the talkback I thought you were going to talk about, because that was incredible. Like it was so instantly derailed to be like a fight between you two mostly and Rodney and somebody else in the audience.
In the audience who didn't believe Leon when he said what font they had used in some credits.
It was like it was really. That should have been recorded because that was very special.
So for me, the moment was there was a party that Leon and I were at down the hill from the hotel, and you know, come closing time, 2 a.m, you know, a festival volunteer was driving us back to the hotel up on top of the hill through a snowstorm. But before we could get up to the long, you know, sort of a quarter-mile long driveway. The cop pulled us over and took the driver out of the car and made him walk a line and touch his nose. And then they put the driver in the back of the police car and drove away and left the two of us in the back seat of a car without keys at 2 a.m. in a snowstorm. So I don't know. I guess there wasn't anybody that we could call. So the two of us had to walk up the hill in blinding snow and in pitch and only seeing the distant lights of the hotel up at the top of the hill. And there was certainly a part of me that said, if Leon's 60 something, maybe late 60s, and I'm a middle-aged, fat ass who never gets out and exercises, and if the two of us fell over and froze to death on the side of the hill, there'd be a certain delicious irony.
Just smash cut to the two of you frozen.
Oh man,
that's perfect. Yeah.
Oh my goodness. Well, before I move on to some of the chat questions, I had so since this movie is about so many theories, of varying degrees of I don't want to say sanity, but wild theories, but I know there are quite a few wild theories about the clipping universe, and I don't know how much you guys pay attention to that kind of stuff, but I was wondering, I know you're not gonna confirm anything.
No.
It's not already, but I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about some of the wilder theories that you've seen.
Well, that's interesting because I mean that is like I definitely thought about that a lot watching the movie tonight, thinking that we hadn't made any of the clipping stuff really. We'd made a handful of songs before we made the score, and we worked on this movie, and then like thinking about like reframing, watching this movie 10 years later in a clipping group, and thinking about the way that we make things and the way that we imbue art, like the way that we fill our work with, like, not, I wouldn't say meaning, but with like sort of signifiers and little sort of light posts, and try to connect them in ways that don't always work. And sometimes people pick up on them, and sometimes they don't, and sometimes they pick up on things that we didn't intend. But that, I mean, the way that the three of us make work is like, it struck me as how related it is to the way, like to my experience watching Room 237, right? That it's like the three of us, Bill, David, and myself, like we think different things happen in the album Splendor and Misery in the plot, and all three of our versions of that plot are true. They're all there, and they're all contradictory, but they're also all there. And I mean, it's definitely like our attempt to make a thing that can be appreciated in the way that The Shining is appreciated from all of these different angles, sort of all at once. But there is no like, I mean, aside from like hopefully things that are very obvious, there is no like sort of core intent and secret. Like we hide tons of secrets, but they're like sometimes jokes, and they're sometimes related to each other, and they're sometimes not. And like,
yeah, I mean, we definitely
much less master planny than you think, but I find that the more we make things and the better we get at making things, like the more little sort of like nuggets we stick in stuff, the more connections and synchronicities I see. Like, I mean, as an example, and maybe I shouldn't say this, but I thought it was very funny. None of us realized on There Existed an Addiction to Blood album that the woman in the psychiatrist clip was named Cynthia, and the character in Story 7 is also named Cynthia. That was a total coincidence, right? Like we didn't plan that. And it's incredible. It's an incredible synchronicity, and it's like makes me really happy. And it's like, oh yeah, there's absolutely a connection there. But that wasn't in our show Bible. We don't have a show Bible, in that way. Well, actually we do, but
well, what I was gonna say is like I think there's two things, which is like one is I think we were partly drawn to. I mean, the reason I got roped into working on Room 237 was I was sitting with Jonathan when he was like, "Ugh, this thing for no money. They sent a clip. I'm just gonna watch it. You want to look at it with me? We'll just put it on the laptop." And we were like, "This already appeals to me and you. Yeah. Let's do it together." But it had to do, like, I think we already, part of the movie, part of why we were attracted to the movie and felt like we had to do it was because we already had this impulse. But what I think the movie also like taught us is, and I'd never compare our what we do to Stanley Kubrick, but what I think Kubrick does do is if he convinces his audience that everything is intentional, then even your weird mistakes take on this meaning. And if you are famous for, even if he hides two weird little secrets and then lets it be known that he hides two weird little secrets in a movie, everyone finds 1,000. Everything becomes a secret. Everything becomes some sort of cryptic. And this is sort of what we started doing, which was just like, oh, let's bury like a handful of things. And now it means that people find things we didn't even know about necessarily. And sometimes we're like, ooh, that's good. No, we'll tell people we did that on purpose if anyone asks. And sometimes we're like, that's outrageous, but I love it. And thank you for doing this. And there are certain things that I'm still holding on to a couple things where I'm like, no one's figured that one out.
Yeah, there's
a couple of things where I'm like, there's still some weird buried shit in there that people have found way more difficult stuff, but like there are some connections and references.
I do think there's a thing on Splendor and Misery that no one will ever find, and that we'll have to like drop a hint for later.
I finally, after years and years, I told, there was one on the self-titled, the unself-titled, that I sort of revealed as like a present on like the 5th anniversary on Twitter or something.
What was that?
I said to listen to the first track on the very first record released on Sub Pop Records, and how the intro has multiple tributes to Steve Albini screaming into a microphone. The track 1, side A, the very first release on Sub Pop Records.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating. But I mean, a couple things related. First off, I had forgotten this part, but one thing that Julie says early in the movie is that I think one reason that people look for clues is, well, the movie is explicitly presented as a puzzle, right? Like that last shot of the party at the end.
Mm-hmm.
That is, in some ways, that you might think that that's, sort of an analog of, the Rosebud moment at the end of Citizen Kane, which answers all the questions that you had. But that's not what it does by any means. No. It provokes questions. It suggests that the movie is a puzzle. And, as far as like those synchronicities from happening, I mean, putting them in on purpose is one way, but I think I don't know if this is in the movie or just something that happened in conversation with John Paul Ryan, but there was a moment when he told me, once you start working with any sufficiently complicated, series of, symbols, these synchronicities are just going to kind of spontaneously manifest. And there are things that I would stumble on that I would get to take advantage of, right? Like there's a moment in the movie where Bill Blakemore says Kubrick, is a super brain, sort of digesting, world history, on behalf of mankind. And I was like, oh, I guess I better find a shot of a brain. And I thumb through, I get a copy of the brain from Planet Arrows, 50s sci-fi movie. And as I scan through it, I find a shot of a giant floating brain in a lab looking at an axe. And I was going to try to find a single image of Kubrick as a super brain planning The Shining. That's so literal, it's almost idiotic, of a brain looking at but there it is. Right? And like even every one of these projects, it's full of those weird coincidences and synchronicities. Like a major one for me, I don't know that it means anything to anybody else, but Glitch in the Matrix, the new one. There's, we spend a lot of time talking about Philip K. Dick, and his exegesis that he talks about, the experience that happened to him in 1973 and 1974, which he writes a shorthand 237 for, and that the recurrence of those, digits 237 in a completely, well, in some ways completely unconnected, but certainly it's going over some maybe some similar territories. It's a very strange coincidence, for me, and those things just have a way of presenting themselves sometimes.
Yeah,
well, and there were so many, like there was the week that Room 237 was in movie theaters, the movie 42, the Jackie.
Yeah, that's right. The Jackie Robinson movie. Yeah.
Jackie Robinson biopic.
And the Kubrick exhibit was at last month, and so there were images of Jack Nicholson's face from The Shining hanging from light poles all over Los Angeles, including like a block away from my house.
I had totally forgotten.
Jackie Robinson movie.
I had totally forgotten about that sequence where Julie talks about her kid having the dream where a bolt, like a chaos bolt, splits his head open and the little kid jumps out, and she talks about it like being the synchronicity that really clarified The Shining for her, though obviously, like in light of the rest of the movie, it feels like she's making the argument that suddenly that Stanley Kubrick made a movie about her kid's dream or something, which is of course ridiculous, but it is like, I mean, that's become such a theme in your movies, and that little moment felt like it's like, oh, that's Glitch in the Matrix is in that little.
I think I have felt things are similar to her, which are more like you're in the midst of a project like this, and you have some coincidence that feels tied to it, and that feels like evidence that you're kind of on the right track.
Yeah.
In a way. Yeah, I think she was saying that she was explicitly thinking about that guy with the split head. As her son came in and told her about a dream with his head, split open. So yeah, no, I totally get that, and whenever this weird, when those 42 billboards went up at the same time that the Jack Nicholson posters were hanging and our movie was coming out.
Yeah.
It was very, and then when we were released on DVD, it was the same day that Stephen King's sequel, Dr. Sleep, was released in hardback.
Right.
Oh yeah.
Wow.
That was something.
Yeah, he was competing, right, for revisiting The Shining.
Boy, we have sampled the hell out of the drums we recorded for Room 237 on a lot of clipping releases, though, haven't we? Yeah, Nick's drums are in like ends. Those are Room 237 drums, and Real on Mid City. Those are Room 237 drums. I feel like there's some of them in Paint Every Day too, actually.
And I'm all reusing tracks from this in new stuff that I do.
Oh, that was a thing I forgot that maybe I've never even told you, Rodney, that there's a track in Room 237 called People Look Like Giants. That's like it's like the one that's in major key. That's really this kind of like lopey, kind of pleasant thing with like a kalimba that was made very quickly that Bill and I both never liked, and I still don't particularly like it. And you used it as a temp track in Glitch in the Matrix at one point. And so I said, okay. And I took the original stems from that track from Room 237 and reversed them, and then just recursively made them into worse and worse quality MP3s over and over and over and over and over again until they just sort of smeared into nothing. And I used that, made that the track in Glitch in the Matrix. I think it's called Giants Look Like People. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
So yeah, moving on to some of the chat questions.
This is gonna be 6 hours long.
Someone asked about how I'm just gonna read it verbatim. How do you think newer media, in particular video essays and podcasts, have shaped fringe media theory and its culture? I think that's a really interesting, because I feel like, while this was obviously 10 years ago, a thing, and people have always had, theories about this movies, being able to, easier and easier broadcast this kind of stuff and, you know, build these online communities and culture around it. You know, I guess, yeah, I was wondering how you think that has kind of affected that whole, the culture of movie theories.
Well, for me, and I'll make it short. You know, I see a ton of them now, whether they're on YouTube, anything from YouTube videos to, you know, Netflix's David War.
Fincher one. Yeah.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, they all still seem to be single point of view. You know, some of them are very good, but I haven't seen anybody push out the self-contradicting, multiple unreliable narrator approach and taking that into any that much further. But I've seen some really good ones. I don't know, Bill. I imagine you've got you may got something for that.
I actually don't. I truly avoid that kind of stuff. I've actually not seen a ton of it.
I still haven't seen.
I don't have a
Var.
lot
Yeah.
to say. Yeah, I haven't watched it. I saw the trailers for it.
Very well produced. I think the 48 Hours one is pretty good.
The 48 Hours one?
Well, that's because that's the most personal. I haven't seen them all.
Interesting. I mean, I'm happy to watch them. It's I don't know. I have a particular unfair sort of frustration as someone who, you know, was trained in a certain way to teach and taught film theory for years. There's I end up yelling at the screen a lot when I watch something like that, which is not, I mean, it's not fair and it's not what they're doing. And but there's and I don't mean to say, I mean, in terms of like, yeah, I mean, it's not fair, but I'm actually, I think there's an avenue for it. I'm curious, Rodney, have you been watching any of the Sundance? Did you watching any Sundance stuff this weekend?
I haven't seen any of the features. I saw a couple shorts.
I was gonna watch. I missed it this morning. I was gonna watch there's someone who's made basically a film essay out of Laura Mulvey's Visual Pleasures in Narrative Cinema. It seems that's what they've done. And I was like, that's actually something that would be massively useful that I'd always kind of wanted, instead of handing students a sort of at this point a little bit old-fashioned like, you know, sort of psychoanalytic post-structuralist Freudian text on feminist film theory from the 70s, which feels a little creaky and maybe a little bit jargony to a lot of people. Well, maybe it's not even that jargony anymore, but to have like this, like a feature-length video essay about the theories in it and how the sort of structure of cinematic visual storytelling has you know, misogyny and patriarchy baked into the very apparatus of cinema, is like exactly what I would love. If I was still teaching, I would love that as an asset instead of having to give people the essay itself. So you know, there is a version of this where I think that might be like a kind of a fascinating future for film scholarship.
Yeah. I mean, well, let me know if you see that one. Let me know if it's any good. I mean, there's also, you know, it's even older than 237, but there's the Slavoj Žižek Pervert's Guide.
Pervert's Guide, yeah.
Anderson, or even I mean, it's not so much about cinema as the news, right? The British guy, Adam Curtis. You know, but for me, again, I'm as interested in what these, you know, what you know, what these narrators have to say, for what it means about them as characters or as people, as what it is, as, you know, the movie or what it is they're talking about, right? That which is, you know, sort of the flip side of some of that stuff.
Yeah. I was just glancing at the other questions.
And I think the reason I like the 48 Hours one is because it's, the narrator is very personal about what the movie meant to him, right? And I don't think his insights are wrong, but they're more powerful because the way that he's able to relate to it from his own experiences growing up.
Yeah, I'll check it out.
So moving on, several people were asking, obviously a lot of clipping, and especially the two recent albums were very influenced by horror movies, and I think people were just asking about how horror movies in general and also film scoring, and specifically horror movie scoring, has influenced kind of the project as a whole. I don't know if that's too broad of a question.
I think we answered that with 2 albums and a lifetime of film scores at this point. Like, I don't know, like, I always really loved. It's funny because none of us went to school for music, and none of us, I think, expected or intended to have a career in music. We were all just music fans. We all 3 went to theater schools. Bill and I at the same place, and David someplace else. And I always loved movie music. I think because my parents really loved classical music, and there was like classical music on in the house all the time, and didn't really care for like rock or pop music, and film music felt like a bridge between like very catchy sort of contemporary melodies, very exciting music, but that still was mostly played by an orchestra, and it felt like a sort of bridge between our worlds in a way that I could like listen to a lot. And I became like really obsessed and like a sort of avid collector of and fan of film music, like as a teenager in the 90s, without ever really the intent to go into it. And then I was just like making music for fun on my computer while I did other stuff, and I didn't think I would ever be a musician. When we were in college, like neither Bill or I went to college for sound design, but we met as undergrads and immediately started doing sound design when I sort of realized that was a job while still making music on the side. And then the first movie I ever scored was like, remember Emmanuelle Schick, who we she was a grad student film student in a class that we were taking. And she was like, hey, you have a band or something, right? Like you do music. Do you want to score my I guess I had worked in it. It was a documentary. The very first movie I ever scored was a documentary.
Yeah, it was a documentary.
It was like a 45-minute documentary about the life of this this French former porn actress. And I realized I sort of, had sort of like taught myself how to make music, and I had this like deep understanding of what film music should do and should feel like, but just because of my fandom of it, but I never formally studied it.
Yeah, Jonathan was very funny when we first became friends. Jonathan was like, because I worked at a video store for 5 years from starting in middle school through when I went to college at 18. So I knew, like, I'd seen everything. I knew every fucking director, everyone who wrote the screenplay. Jonathan knew who scored every movie. If some conversation comes up and some super obscure movie comes up, he would chime in with some guy's name who scored that movie, who no one had ever heard of, and who'd made he did these 3 other movies. Like, he knew every single person who scored any movie. You're like,
I can't really do that anymore. There are too many movies and there are too many new people, and I can't keep track of it anymore.
Well, you can't do it anymore, but I bet you could still do it for like the entire 1990s.
Yeah, probably.
Like someone was just like Last of the Mohicans with Daniel Day-Lewis, which I've never seen in a million. I'm pretty sure that was James Newton Howard, but yeah. There you go. See?
Am I right? I think I'm right.
You always were in the old days, so who knows? I find, I used to be.
Oh shit, I'm not right. It was Randy Edelman and Trevor Jones. How did I know that? That's crazy.
I used to be really good at trivia, and that goes away slowly over the years. I'm still okay, but it's like the steel trap that my head was at 18 is not exactly the case anymore.
Someone was asking about, I just kind of, in general, the three of you seem to be people who, I don't know, from an outsider, it seems like you work a lot. You put out stuff pretty frequently, whether that be, with clipping or with, other projects with like soundtrack scores, or even with Rodney, between when this movie has come out and now, you've put out 5 or 6 movies.
Not as many as I would like, but 3 other features, one of them co-directed. I produced. I've got a couple of things I've done, but but to your question, I feel like I'm not nearly as productive as I could be.
Well, someone's just asking about, how do you deal with burnout when that becomes an issue?
I'm more worried about getting the next. I'm more worried about keeping busy than burning out at this point. But maybe their experience is different.
Yeah. I don't know, Jonathan. Have you ever?
Yeah, every project pretty much, right? There's always there's a Joseph Campbellian belly of the beast of every project, right? I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not good at like the work-life balance, certainly, So I mean you're catching me on essentially a week of like almost all-nighters, I'm like doing multiple movies at once and a play and teaching right now all at once, and it's just like it's a lot, and it's all really fun stuff and it's all really great stuff, and it's like all stuff that I feel like I'm not able to give the attention I would want to give to it because I'm distracted by all of these other things, but they're all really important and they're all really great. So I don't have a good answer for that.
Yeah. I was gonna say, I mean, like I remember the first couple of times I like went to like author readings by like people I really admired. And there would be like a Q&A and afterwards, and it was always about like, it was always from aspiring writers, like how do you write to the writers, and the Q&A was never about the work they just read out loud from. It was always like, what time of day do you write, how many hours do you give yourself, do you write longhand with paper, do you type it all, or do you get a second draft by typing up your notes, like all these like nuts and bolts things. And I'm like, whenever questions like this come up to me, I just like panic because I'm like, honestly, I have no idea how I do anything. It's chaos. There's no plan. There's no time of day. There's no like schedule or like you like writers, I don't know, other creative people have these like, oh, I get up every morning, I do this. It was one of my buddies is an editor for that thing Masterclass, and he gave me a password, and I was watching Elmore Leonard talk about like when he writes, and he's like, I write 4 hours every morning the second I wake up, and then I'm done for the day, every single day for the last 45 years. And I'm like, Jesus Christ, I would love to have like.
Yeah, no, I've never been able to have a plan. I move between, it's so busy I can't think, and I want to jump off a building, so I don't have anything to do. I'm going to lay down and lay face down on the carpet until somebody nudges me.
There's a really sweet spot of being like just busy enough that you can't procrastinate or slack off, but not so busy that you feel like you're doing a really crappy job on everything, right? And it's hard to sort of nail that sweet spot. I mean, honestly, like for me, the most exhausting thing is having too many projects at once. Like I'm the happiest when I can just like devote myself entirely to one thing and I don't have to shift brain space. I have like a kitchen timer down here at this point, and I like set it for as much time as I have until my next meeting, and I like turn all my things off and put all my phones, like put the phone away and turn off all my emails and things, and just like try to get something done before that next meeting hits. I don't know how, I mean, I guess I do know how other composers do it, right? They have a whole team of people who are writing their music for them, but like I feel like I spend all day in meetings talking about the music I'm supposed to be writing, and then I have to write it all night, and it's exhausting.
Yeah. Well, it's the multiple projects thing that gets frustrating too, because especially like between when I don't have something in production, you know, I'm researching and developing a half a dozen things that I might be doing next, and that's always a frustrating place where you're simultaneously overextended and unemployed.
Yeah. Actually, I wanted to ask you how you kind of go about finding the subjects for your projects. Like, I'm sure with this project there are communities dedicated to it around, dedicated around theorizing the Shining stuff, but with all the kind of different topics that you've covered, how do you kind of cast that line out to find these people?
Well, it is a little bit of a casting process, right? Like, after Tim and I spent a year, sort of researching Shining theories, we kind of had a list of like different approaches to the Shining, say. Like, we knew that there were people who made maps, right? And we knew that there's Jay Weidner had his, moon landing idea. And we knew about eventually we found out about the backwards, forwards and backwards screening. But like things like the maps in particular was, well, let's find out of the different people who make maps, let's find one whose maps are especially striking and, who's got a lot to say more than, something that'll be a significant chunk. And when we found Julie, it was clear that she was the one, right? So when it was time to do The Nightmare, it was kind of similar in that there was a casting process in that I had done enough research about sleep paralysis that I knew sort of the different, sort of forms that experience can take. And all the people in that movie were people that found us, right? Like, we announced that we were making it and invited people to approach us with their stories. And I remember like one thing in particular that I wanted was someone who would talk about a simultaneous experience, right? Like, if, big question, that movie is, in sleep paralysis are the things that people see, things that they're creating out of their, in their subconscious, in their imagination, or is it something real that they can perceive? And when you would come across stories where two people would sort of be sleeping in either side by side or in different rooms in the same house and experiencing something similar at the same time, that seemed to argue to the point of, okay, it's something external. And we'd come across a bunch of those stories. So as we were sifting through all of the, responses, somebody who had a story like that, would go on the short list. So it's a combination of researching and finding, the different takes on these subjects, that are interesting, that are provocative, that map out, sort of the range of things. But then it's, when we hear from 100 people and we talk to 20 and we use 5. There's one thing that we always discover, is that even if people are cast, and that's kind of a weird word, more of a reality TV word than I think for what we try to do. If they're, if they're chosen for one element for of one thing that they're going to talk about, the categories never turn out to be that cut and dried, and they always blur into one another, and nobody ever fits into neat boxes. And I kind of let that happen, again, trying to be as honest as I can in representing their experience the way they describe it.
I just want to say I'm sorry. I should actually run. I have a screening window for one of my the films for Sunday.
Yeah.
that I have to push play on it in the next 10 minutes, or else I don't get to see it. So
Okay,
I'm gonna.
well-
If, I don't mean to like call it for everyone, but I should run.
No, I think we are definitely wrapping up. I think before we end, is there anything that you guys wanted to tease that you're working on at the moment or that's coming up soon?
I don't know. David said on Fallon a couple nights ago that we're working on a new album, so I guess that's
We're
public
always
knowledge.
working on a new album, even when we're working on many albums simultaneously. Though, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
we
I know
always
it's not like actually surprising, but
it's
I
like
guess
we
and
always
we did take a picture of ourselves in the studio when we were like actually doing
Yeah.
shit. So, I don't know what's to tease.
that Danny Elfman remix got sort of announced.
Yeah, that
You-
one's weird. I didn't know when to actually post it because it just like was on the website. Like he did.
Yeah.
So what else?
And, like, it's
it's
it's delayed. I guess it's delayed because like no one can get vinyl
Because of-
pressed or
yeah.
something. But yeah, we did a remix for the new Danny Elfman solo album, but it's only on like the multiple vinyl box set.
Like the special edition vinyl box.
Oh no.
And a bunch of bands did. I mean, there's a ton of people.
There's a
on
ton
there.
of cool stuff. I mean, some of those have come out. Like the Square Pusher one came out, and the Kid 606 one,
And the Zach Hill one came out.
and
Yeah.
Shoo Shoo.
But like ours
Yeah.
is on there. There's a health one. There's like I think
Oh,
right.
yeah, Health. Yeah,
I think
yeah.
there's a health one. There's like a track with Trent Reznor. There's a track with Blixa Bargeld from
Yeah.
Einstein to Neubauten, and
Yeah, that when that came out, when the Danny Elfman and Trent Reznor track came out, I was just like, man, it's like my whole high school is just like really, really coming for me right now.
well, that's what I was saying. That's like
It's
when I found
crazy.
out
Yeah.
that Kim Gordon
it.
from Sonic Youth and Danny Elfman dated in high school.
Yeah.
I was like,
Unbelievable. Yeah.
how is this? That's like
Well, I was
the
just,
most me.
when I was helping Marco on the Swan stuff, that Michael Shira and Madonna dated briefly.
Whoa. That's crazy. I never heard that one.
He
That's
didn't include it in the
nuts.
movie because it was too gossipy, and I'm like, that.
I hope Madonna recovered emotionally. What a nightmare that must have been.
Is that
Seriously.
is that remix project the clubbing stuff? I don't know if that was like supposed to be an actual project, but is that still upcoming?
In theory, yeah. I made what I think is the first in our mind, it
is so good. Since I didn't have anything to do with it, I feel I have no shame saying it's like one of my favorite things ever. Jonathan remixed like just like dance, like club dance tracks out of our stuff, and it is. I like listened to it. I just listened to the files.
I've been threatening. I've been threatening to do it for years. Like since we titled the first that second record for the first one for Sub Pop CLPPNG, I was like, oh, there's got to be a dance remix of it called CLBBNG. That's really funny. Ha, 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 right. And then I feel like I had made enough weird little remixes, and then I had like enough ideas that when we got asked to do that live in Minecraft thing,
Yeah.
and David had no time, I was like, here's the pitch. I'll do everything, and then you just listen to it and freestyle over it while you're hearing it for the first time, and just do hype vocals on it. That'll get this done real quick. And it was, of course, it was a ton of work.
We both did that. I just set up my gear and just played noise over it.
Yeah.
Just live, just like basically, I'd heard all the tracks before, but like I hadn't heard like the whole mix of it. It was just like,
yeah. And then that sort of turned in. I have made like a couple of them have come out, like the.
Yeah, I know there's one on like the Songs for Trans Youth compilation.
Yes,
and
the
there was
the Get Up remix is on there, I think. Right.
there's one on a comp for the Land
right?
magazine,
Yeah.
which is a magazine.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that.
Our friends.
I think they said that's shipping out soon, so hopefully.
Great.
But the idea is there will be like a release of those.
Yeah. Okay.
There's like 4 that I've collected that as a release that I'm like, that's the first one. That'll happen at some point.
All right.
Yep.
I don't know.
Bill, if you needed to drop out, I don't want to.
Yeah, I should.
what-
Your time
really-
limit, yeah.
What movie are you seeing?
It's oh God, I don't know. It's about witches, and it's got the lady from Lamb.
Oh shit. Okay. Yeah. Go watch it and tell me if it's good.
Oh. There was a movie last night that I thought was pretty strong called The Watcher with
That's what you said. Yeah.
yeah, that one was
Yeah,
pretty strong.
people writing about that one.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll report back. Thank you so much for everything.
Thank you so much for joining. Yeah.
I'm gonna split. Thanks, y'all.
Yeah, before the rest of us leave, is there anything that is coming up for you, Rodney, that you wanted to plug?
Nothing anytime soon. I mean, I have an article in the new issue of Fangoria about one of my favorite horror docs, Demon Lover Diary. So it just hit newsstands now.
Nice.
Otherwise, the Glitch in the soundtrack, the Glitch in the Matrix soundtrack is not too many copies left on vinyl.
Yeah. There are a lot of copies left in this house, which I'm very annoyed about. So
yeah,
hopefully,
I still got to pitch them up. But
yeah, I have plenty for you, and hopefully that means that somebody buys the rest that Brian has over at Death Bomb, and he takes some of them away from me.
Yeah, you guys can message Jonathan and order directly from him now. Yeah.
Please don't do that. I'm terrible at the post office, but
there is a Glitch Blu-ray, and this whole thing has made me think that, boy, if it wasn't for a global pandemic, it would be nice to do some more 10th anniversary screenings of this thing.
Yeah.
Again, I mean, especially, again, the sound of the music, you really have to hear it. What a good theater sound system, how it handles this music. And what's been great about our later collaborations is Jonathan's been able to, not just compose the scores, but handle the sound design as well. And when, the entire audio of the film is coming through, sort of the same set of ears or hands, that sensibility, carries through everything. It's a really powerful combination. It's one that I'm surprised isn't more common.
It's just a lot of work, and usually things are on schedules that just really wouldn't allow for it.
Could be.
Like I'm working on a movie right now where that was the idea. I was going to do the sound, the music, and the sound, and the music is so much work, like so much more work, just refining everything, and it's taking so much time. And the nature, the movie is evolving so much, and a lot of the music has to be changed and rewritten because it's right for the movie all the time, and it's making it better, and it's great, but it just means I literally wouldn't have time to do both at once.
Brian has kept teasing that you are, an upcoming announcement about the biggest thing that you've ever done. I don't know if this is the same project.
I don't know what that could be.
No, okay.
He probably means that podcast that I've scored, which is not the biggest thing I've ever done, and I just don't know when it's coming out. So, but I scored a podcast. It's coming out.
Oh. Well, I think that about wraps it up. I don't know. I don't think there's anything else that we have to cover, and we've been going for a while now, so I don't want to hold you guys any longer.
I completed.
Yeah, it's I got very early this morning.
Well, thank you guys both for coming and being a part of this. It's really cool to have such a retrospective after this amount of time on a piece of media like this.
Well, Lucas, thanks so much for organizing these. Like, it's really fun. It's really cool. It's really nice to know that things we did so long ago resonate with people still too. It's really fun.
My Captain Ahab collection really shows exactly that.
Man. All right, fair. Yeah.
All right, I think we'll call it there. Thank you guys.
Nice to talk to you guys. Good to see you, Jonathan.
Good to see you, Rodney. Cool. Talk to you soon.